Hi guys, Dr. Robert Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. I'd like to talk today about insulin. Insulin is the primary anabolic hormone in humans. When we consume carbohydrates, when we consume certain amino acids, our pancreas releases insulin. This insulin goes into our blood, and the main effect of insulin is to cause the uptake of glucose into cells. And it does this by attaching to a receptor on the cell membrane, and this signals the cell to pass glucose transporters and amino acid transporters to the cell membrane, and the glucose is passed into the cell. That lowers insulin levels because the insulin is used up. It also lowers the blood glucose levels because the glucose is passed into the cell. Therefore, postprandially, after we've had a meal, what tends to happen is our insulin levels and our blood glucose levels will rise. The insulin will then cause the blood glucose levels to fall, and as we pass through our postprandial period, what we tend to find is that blood glucose levels and insulins will then fall to baseline, and as the insulin levels fall, the antagonistic hormone of insulin, which is glucagon, will rise, and that will start to cause the breakdown of glycogen that has just been stored to provide energy. So this is the way that the body maintains its blood sugar levels. It's this cycle between insulin in the period after we've just eaten and glucagon in the fasting periods in between our meals that allows us to maintain our blood glucose within a particular range. Now, another aspect to understand about insulin, which is important, is the fact that insulin is the primary anabolic hormone, and it causes the storage of energy. It causes the storage of, for example, of glucose into skeletal muscle. Glucose will also pass into fat cells. The insulin there will stimulate the glucose to be converted into fatty acids, which will then be converted into triglycerides and stored as fat. And insulin has this effect. It's an anabolic hormone, and it causes a general anabolic effect. In other words, insulin is there to store energy. That's the primary purpose of insulin. It works primarily, obviously, on glucose, but it's there and it stimulates pathways that are involved in the synthesis of larger compounds that are then stored as energy. Glucagon, on the other hand, is a hormone that causes the breakdown of energy. It stimulates the oxidation of these compounds that we've just stored to be able to provide us with energy, and that's why the cycle proceeds between insulin and glucagon. The problem is that insulin is an inhibitor. It puts a brake on the catabolic pathways, and that makes sense biochemically, because if you're storing energy, you don't also want to be breaking it down at the same time, because that would create a futile cycle and that would be very inefficient. So generally, when insulin levels are high and anabolism is proceeding, there is a brake that is put on all the catabolic pathways by insulin, and insulin will inhibit most of the catabolic pathways in the human metabolism. Now, this is fine as long as the insulin system is functioning correctly, and as long as we go through this cycle where there is a postprandial period of anabolism stimulated mainly by insulin, followed by a fasting period where glucagon becomes the dominant hormone. That's fine, because we go through this cycle and we will store the energy and then use it as a subsequent period, and that will allow us to maintain our body weights. However, if we develop insulin resistance, the system breaks down. Now, insulin resistance is a phenomenon where the insulin hormone is not able to lock onto its receptor effectively and not able to cause a cellular effect, and this prevents the uptake of glucose into the cells. The exact way that the insulin receptor becomes insensitive is not fully understood, but generally the hormone will attach to the receptor, but the signal will not be passed into the cell, and therefore insulin becomes less effective at causing glucose to pass from the blood into the cells. And this causes blood glucose levels to increase because the insulin is less efficient. And as the insulin becomes less efficient, the pancreas releases more insulin to compensate for this inefficiency. And generally what happens is, as insulin resistance develops, blood glucose levels rise. Fasting blood glucose levels never return to their baseline levels, and insulin levels never return to their baseline levels. So the period of fasting where glucagon should be the dominant hormone is actually characterized by higher levels of insulin. And this means that the catabolic pathways that glucagon should be stimulating to release energy are actually inhibited by insulin. And what we tend to find, therefore, is that we have an inability to oxidize fuels. Insulin is a brake on all these catabolic pathways, and when it's present in the fasting period, where glucagon is normally the hormone that should be dominant, we get all sorts of problems. If you understand this biochemistry, if you understand that insulin resistance causes insulin levels to rise when they should be much lower in this glucagon dominant period, what you understand is that this is the cause of weight gain. We are in a permanent in this scenario, we are in a permanent anabolic state. We are in a state where we have an inability to break down energy efficiently, which gives us a lack of motivation for exercise, and we're in a situation where it's very easy for us to store anything as body fat. And if you look at weight gain and those people that suffer from weight gain, this is exactly what they complain about. They find that exercise has no effect because they have no motivation or energy to do it. Whatever they eat, they tend to put weight on, and this is this is all characterized by high insulin levels. So the obvious question is, how can we reverse this? Because if this is causing weight loss, if we can reverse this process and bring insulin levels down, that will free up glucagon to be able to stimulate the catabolic pathways, and this will allow us to oxidize energy. How do we reverse this process of insulin resistance? Well, we need to look at what causes insulin resistance. Generally, the evidence in the nutritional literature is mounting that insulin resistance is caused by three factors. Firstly, refined crystalline fructose. Fructose is very efficient at causing insulin resistance. You can feed rats an equivalent amount of fructose that you would find in a Western diet that was high in fructose, but still within the normal range that a human would eat. You can feed a rat those levels of fructose and they'll develop insulin resistance within about 2 weeks. So fructose is highly efficient at causing insulin resistance, and fructose is found it's in sugar, so anything that's got sugar in will have fructose in it because it's one of the moieties of the disaccharide sucrose, and therefore it's everywhere. Most Western foods contain sugar, and therefore most people eat far too much fructose, and therefore most people have very high levels of insulin resistance, which causes weight gain. Another factor that causes insulin resistance is refined carbohydrates, refined starches. And this is problematic because they're digested much too quickly. The quick digestion causes more insulin to be released, and this is one of the drivers of insulin resistance. The third factor that leads to insulin resistance is a lack of exercise. Most people think that exercise causes weight loss because it burns calories, and that's not the case. Exercise causes weight loss because it's an insulin sensitizing activity. When you train your skeletal muscles, when you go out and perform exercise, the insulin receptors are stimulated, insulin resistance is reversed, and the sensitivity of the skeletal muscle for insulin increases, and therefore more glucose passes into the skeletal muscle cell. So exercise is a very good way of sensitizing skeletal muscle to the effects of insulin, and that lowers insulin resistance. Now these three factors in combination we find in the typical Western lifestyle. Most people in the West, in the developing nations, they consume a typical Western diet, which is high in fructose. In other words, it's got lots of sugar in it, and is also high in refined carbohydrates, which causes rapid rises in blood sugar, and that causes too much insulin to be released. And they also do too little exercise. So what do we do to reverse insulin resistance? We look at these three factors and we eliminate them or reverse them. The fructose is very easy to get out of the diet. Just don't eat any sugar. Sugar is in all refined processed foods. If you are interested in your health in any way, you should not be eating any of those foods at all, ever. Those foods are very bad for your health. They are the cause of Western lifestyle diseases, and if you continue to eat them, particularly in high concentrations, you will eventually very likely get a Western lifestyle disease of some kind. It will certainly cause you to put weight on, and certainly cause your body to deteriorate very rapidly. Refined flour, refined starches are also in typical Western foods. They tend to be in breakfast cereals, breads, all the things that typical Westerners consume tend to have refined grains in them. So you eliminate the sugar, you eliminate the fructose, and you, instead of eating the refined grains, you need to eat whole grains. So you need to eat whole grain porridge oats. You need to make sure that if you eat bread, that bread is of a whole grain type. You need to eat more legumes, which are very slow release carbohydrates, and you need to eat all of the types of foods that are associated with traditional eating patterns. And in addition to that, if you don't do any kind of exercise at all, you need to perform some kind of exercise. Now, I'm not an advocate of long periods of aerobic exercise. I don't feel that those people who are overweight benefit in any way from lots and lots of aerobic exercise. There's nothing wrong with mild aerobic exercise. Obviously, if it's part of your sport and you need to be incredibly fit, then that is fair enough. But for the general person, the general man on the street, the general woman on the street, lots and lots of aerobic exercise, particularly if you're overweight, is actually detrimental to your health. Firstly, it puts a lot of stress on your cardiovascular system, and secondly, it also puts a lot of stress on your joints. It's a very good exercise to do when you are already at the right weight. But if you are overweight and you want to lose weight, I would suggest that you try not to do too much aerobic exercise. Walking and doing your daily activities like digging the garden really give your cardiovascular system enough of a workout to be able to give you enough fitness for everyday life. There is a better way to sensitize your body to the effects of insulin, and that is to perform resistance training. Now, if we look aerobic exercise, if we assume that I'm right and that exercise actually is beneficial because it lowers insulin levels, when you perform aerobic exercise like running, what you're generally doing is you're training your leg muscles. When you sit on an exercise bike, you're training your leg muscles, and that will sensitize your leg muscles to the insulin. When you perform resistance training, you can train all of the muscles in your body, and that means that you've got more of an insulin sensitizing effect, and that is why resistance training is a much better form of exercise if you want to lower your insulin levels and you want to increase your insulin sensitivity. I would personally suggest that anybody that's interested in weight loss, anyone that's interested in general health, they do different types of exercise, including resistance training and including aerobic training, but they don't focus solely on one particular type. I think there are too many people that get fixated on a particular sport or a particular type of exercise, and that can actually be detrimental to your health. For general health, if you want to be healthy, the best way to exercise is to do a mixture of exercise in moderation, performing some resistance training, performing some aerobic exercise, and you need to combine that with a high quality diet. The reason you need to eat a high quality diet as well is because generally it's the fructose and the refined starches that are actually the drivers of insulin resistance. Exercise can, to a certain extent, sensitize skeletal muscle to insulin, but if you're eating a low quality diet at the same time, it generally won't have as much effect, and this is probably why exercise, particularly in obese individuals in studies, shows very inconsistent results. So I think the take-home message today is really to forget calorie counting. Calorie counting and endless aerobic exercise is not effective at causing long-term successful weight loss. The key to weight loss is to control your insulin levels. The key to controlling your insulin levels is to reduce your insulin resistance, and the key to reducing your insulin resistance is to eat high-quality foods that do not contain any fructose or any refined carbohydrates.